E8s. Most people think they know what an empath looks like at their best. They picture someone warm, deeply feeling, endlessly compassionate. 88s. The person in the room who always knows what you are going through before you even say a word. They picture someone gentle, someone open, someone who leads with their heart in every situation. Radiates. And that image is not wrong exactly, but it is dangerously incomplete because there is a stage that empaths can reach, a final stage that almost nobody talks about. E8s. And the people who have witnessed someone at this stage, the people who have been in a relationship with them, worked alongside them, or tried to manipulate them, radiates. They do not use words like gentle or soft to describe the experience. They use a different word. They say it felt almost scary. And today I want to show you exactly why they say that. Radiates, and more importantly, I want to show you what this stage actually is, what it takes to reach it, and why so very few empaths ever get there. E8s. Before anything else, I need to dismantle something you have probably been told. E8s. There is a version of empathy that gets celebrated constantly in popular culture, and it is the version where sensitivity is the whole story, where feeling deeply is the beginning and the end of what it means to be an empath. And that version is real in the early stages, but it is only part of the picture. Radiates, because the research on emotional development, and I am talking about actual documented behavioral science here, shows us something that the inspirational quote industry never mentions. Sensitivity without structure is not a gift, it is a liability. And the empaths who spend their entire lives in that raw, open, unprotected state of pure feeling without the architecture of self-awareness around it, they do not reach the final stage. Radiates. They get stuck in a cycle of giving too much, absorbing too much, being used too often, and recovering just enough to do it all over again. The final stage requires something completely different. E8s. It requires the empath to have gone through enough pain that the sensitivity transforms, and when it transforms, what emerges is something that the people around them genuinely did not see coming. Here is what the behavioral research actually shows about emotional intelligence at its highest levels. Daniel Goleman radiates, whose work on emotional intelligence has been studied and applied across military training, corporate leadership, and clinical psychology for decades. D8s found that the highest functioning emotionally intelligent individuals share a set of traits that look almost nothing like the popular image of a deeply feeling sensitive person. D8s. They are extraordinarily calm under pressure. They read social dynamics with a precision that borders on unsettling. They do not react emotionally in the moment, even when they feel intensely. Idiots. And they have developed what researchers call metacognitive emotional awareness, which means they can observe their own emotional states the way a scientist observes data without being controlled by those states. Radiates. Now take that profile and combine it with the natural perceptual depth of a high empathy individual, and you begin to understand why people who encounter a fully realized empath describe the experience the way they do. E8s. This is not softness. This is a level of human development that is genuinely rare and genuinely powerful. The first thing you need to understand about the final stage is what produces it. Radiates, because it does not come from reading the right books or following the right practices or deciding one day to become more self-aware. It comes from a specific type of experience that most people who care about empaths wish they never had to go through. It comes from betrayal. From being deeply open with someone and having that openness used against them. From trusting completely and discovering that the trust was never safe. E8s. From loving with their whole capacity and learning that the person receiving that love was not capable of honoring it. E8s. And from going through that experience not once but enough times that a pattern becomes undeniable. Radiates. Chase Hughes talks about this in his behavioral analysis work when he describes how people who have been targeted and manipulated by high control personalities often develop one of two responses. E8s. They either close down entirely, become emotionally unavailable, build walls so thick that nothing gets in, including the good, or they go through a different process entirely. D8s. A more difficult and more rare process. They stay open but they get precise. And that precision is the beginning of everything. Precision in an empath does not look like what you might imagine. It is not coldness. It is not detachment. It is not the performance of not caring. It is something much more subtle and much more powerful than any of those things. It is the ability to be fully present with another person, to feel what they feel, to understand their emotional reality with remarkable accuracy. Radiates, while simultaneously operating from a completely stable internal center that the other person's emotional state cannot destabilize. Think about how rare that is for a moment. Most people, E8s, when they are around someone in emotional pain or emotional chaos, get pulled into that chaos. They absorb it, they react to it, they try to fix it, they feel responsible for it. E8s. The empath in their early stage does all of this at an amplified level because their sensitivity means they feel everything more intensely. E8s. But the empath in the final stage does something completely different. They feel it fully, they understand it completely, and they remain grounded. Not because they have shut the feeling down, radiates, but because they have built an internal foundation so stable that the feeling moves through them without owning them. And to someone on the outside, it's particularly someone who is used to being able to affect people emotionally, that stability reads as almost unnerving. Now I want to go deeper because this is where the research gets truly interesting. E8s. There is a concept in behavioral neuroscience called effective regulation, which refers to the ability to consciously influence and direct your own emotional states. Yates. And studies consistently show that individuals who have developed high levels of effective regulation, particularly those who developed it through processing significant emotional pain rather than simply avoiding it. Yates show measurable differences in how their prefrontal cortex interacts with the amygdala during emotionally charged situations. In simple terms, Yates, the part of their brain responsible for reason and perspective, maintains communication with the emotional response center even under significant stress. Radiates, most people lose that communication under pressure. The emotionally mature empath retains it. Radiates, and what that means in practical terms is that they can be in the middle of a conversation that would send most people into a defensive or reactive spiral and remain genuinely present. Yates, genuinely perceptive and genuinely calm, not because they are suppressing what they feel, but because what they feel is no longer the thing driving the car. Yates. Here is the second reveal, and this is the one that makes people genuinely uncomfortable when they first understand it. The final stage empath does not just feel what people are feeling. Yates. They see what people are doing, and those are not the same thing. Early stage empaths are primarily feeling oriented. They absorb the emotional content of an interaction and respond to that. But fully realized empaths have developed a second layer of perception that runs simultaneously with the emotional one. They are reading behavior, they are tracking patterns. They are noticing the gap between what someone says and what someone does, between the emotion being presented and the motivation underneath it. It's between the story someone tells about themselves and the way they actually show up in real situations. Chase Hughes calls this behavioral baseline reading. It is a skill that intelligence professionals and elite negotiators train for years to develop. The empath in the final stage has developed it through lived experience. Radiates through being burned enough times that their nervous system got very, very good at detecting the early signals of what was coming, and this creates something remarkable. Radiates. They become almost impossible to deceive, not because they are suspicious, not because they assume the worst, but because they have calibrated their perception so finely that inconsistency registers before the other person even knows they have revealed it. Think about what this means in a real interaction. Someone approaches the final stage empath with a hidden agenda. Maybe they want something. Maybe they are performing a version of themselves designed to gain access or trust or some form of advantage. And in the early stages of the interaction, everything looks fine. The words are right. The tone is appropriate. The surface presentation is clean. But there are micro patterns. Small behavioral inconsistencies. Moments where the emotional display does not quite match the content. Brief signals in word choice, in timing, in what is said and what is conspicuously not said. The average person misses all of this entirely. Even most empaths miss it at earlier stages because they are focused on how the interaction feels rather than what the interaction reveals. But the final stage empath catches it, not necessarily consciously in the moment, but something registers. Something below the level of articulation, but above the level of pure instinct files the inconsistency. And by the time the interaction is over, they have a remarkably accurate read on who they were actually talking to. This is why people who try to manipulate a final stage empath often describe the experience as strange. They feel seen in a way that makes them uncomfortable. They feel like the empath somehow already knew. And the reason it feels that way is because the empath did already know. Just not in the way the manipulator imagined. The third reveal is the one that I think is most important for you to understand if you are watching this and you suspect you might be approaching this stage yourself. The final stage empath has resolved their relationship with external validation. And I do not mean they have reduced their need for it or they are working on caring less about what people think. I mean they have genuinely, at a deep psychological level, stopped organizing their sense of self around how other people respond to them. And if you have spent any time in the world of psychology, you know how profoundly unusual that is, because the research on human social behavior shows us that the vast majority of people, of cultures across age groups, across personality types, construct a significant portion of their self-image from reflected appraisal. Which is a technical way of saying they know who they are partly by seeing how other people react to them. The opinions of others function as a mirror. And when that mirror shows them something they do not like, it destabilizes their sense of self. This is normal human psychology. It is deeply wired. And it is one of the primary mechanisms that manipulation exploits. If you need approval, you can be controlled through approval. If you need to be liked, you can be managed through the threat of being disliked. If your self-worth rises and falls with external response, anyone who controls that response has leverage over you. The final stage empath has eliminated that leverage, not through arrogance, not through deciding they are better than other people or that other people's opinions do not matter. D8s. But through a process of internal consolidation where they have developed such a clear, stable, and accurate sense of who they are that external opinions simply cannot rewrite it. D8s. They can hear criticism without collapsing. They can be misunderstood without needing to immediately correct the record. D8s. They can be disapproved of by people whose approval they once desperately needed and remain completely intact. And this is what unsettles people most. D8s. Because we are collectively trained to expect that emotional pressure produces emotional response. We expect that if we withdraw approval, the person will feel it and adjust. We expect that if we express disappointment or disapproval, the other person will become anxious to restore our good opinion. The final stage empath simply does not do this. They hear it. They consider it honestly, and if it does not align with what they know to be true about themselves, they let it pass, without drama, without defensiveness. Radiates. Without the performance of being unbothered that is actually bothered underneath, just genuine equanimity. And in a world where almost everyone can be moved by social pressure, someone who genuinely cannot be is a profoundly different kind of presence. The behavioral research on what psychologists call identity stability under social threat is extraordinarily revealing here. Studies show that individuals with high identity stability, meaning their sense of self does not fluctuate significantly in response to social feedback, demonstrate measurably different patterns of behavior in conflict and high-pressure situations. They make better decisions under social pressure. They are more resistant to groupthink. They are significantly less susceptible to the kind of emotional manipulation that depends on activating shame, fear of rejection, or fear of social exclusion. And they are dramatically more capable of maintaining their stated values and boundaries even when the cost of doing so is social disapproval. Now, consider that this profile, radiates, which researchers usually associate with decades of deliberate personal development, is something that a mature empath can arrive at through a completely different path, through pain that became wisdom. D8s. Through loss that became clarity. Through betrayal that, rather than closing them down, refined them into something more precise, more stable, and more genuinely free than they had ever been before. E8s. Here is the fourth reveal, and this is the one that gives the final stage its name in the title of this video. E8s. Because this is where it becomes genuinely difficult to describe without using language that sounds extreme. Radiates. The final stage empath has developed a quality of presence that most people have never encountered in another human being and do not know how to categorize when they do. D8s. It is not charisma in the conventional sense. Charisma is performative. Charisma is something you project outward to create an effect in others. What the final stage empath has is different. It is more like gravity. It pulls rather than pushes. It does not announce itself. It does not try to impress. It simply is, radiates. And the people in the room feel it without being able to explain exactly what they are feeling. There is something about being genuinely seen, genuinely understood without being judged, radiates. That produces a profound and sometimes unsettling response in people. Because most of us have never actually experienced it. We have experienced being approved of, which feels good. We have experienced being evaluated, which creates anxiety. We have experienced being agreed with, which is comfortable. But being truly seen, D8s. Having someone perceive you accurately and remain completely calm and non-reactive about what they perceive, that is a different experience entirely. And the final stage empath does this naturally, constantly, without effort, because they are not performing perception. They are simply present. And that level of presence, unmediated, unperformed, undistracted presence, idiots, is one of the rarest things in human experience. This is documented in research on what therapists and behavioral scientists call the therapeutic alliance, D8s, which is the quality of the relationship between a therapist and a client that predicts treatment outcomes more reliably than almost any other variable. Therapists who produce the most consistently transformative results, regardless of the specific modality they use, share a set of interpersonal qualities. They are fully present, D8s. They are non-reactive. They demonstrate genuine understanding without judgment. They maintain their own stability while being in contact with significant emotional pain in others. These qualities, D8s, which take trained therapists years of supervised practice to develop, are qualities that the final stage empath has arrived at through their own journey, not in a clinical context, D8s, but in their daily life, in their relationships, in the way they simply exist in the world, and the effect on the people around them reflects it. D8s. Conversations with a final stage empath often feel different from any conversation the other person has had before. More honest, more revealing, somehow more real. Radiates, because they are not managing the interaction the way most people manage interactions. They are just there, fully, completely. And that fullness is, in its own way, quite powerful. D8s. Now I want to address something directly because I think it is important for the integrity of this conversation. When I say the final stage is scary, D8s, I do not mean it produces fear in the way that danger or aggression produces fear. The final stage empath is not frightening because they are harsh or cold or ruthless. D8s. They are often described as among the most genuinely warm people someone has ever met. What produces the feeling that gets labeled as scary is something much more specific. Radiates. It is the feeling of encountering someone who cannot be played, someone who cannot be managed through the usual emotional tools, someone whose self-concept is stable enough that your opinion of them It's positive or negative does not visibly move them. Someone who sees patterns you thought were invisible. It's someone who is not performing kindness or performing interest, but is simply and completely present with you in a way that feels more real than most of what passes for connection in daily life. It's that combination of qualities, genuine warmth plus radical stability plus accurate perception plus complete non-reactivity, produces an experience in other people that they often struggle to name. Yates. And when people cannot name an experience, when it does not fit a familiar category, the word they often reach for is intense or powerful, or if they are being fully honest, a little scary. It's because here is the truth that sits underneath all of this. Most of what passes for social interaction is management. People managing how they are perceived. Yates. People managing how much of themselves they reveal. People managing the emotional temperature of the room to stay comfortable and keep others comfortable. Radiates, people managing the narrative others have about them. And we are so accustomed to this management, so normalized to it, that we barely notice it happening. It is the water we swim in. Radiates, and then someone sits across from you who is not managing anything, who has nothing to protect because their sense of self is not at risk. Radiates, who is not trying to be perceived a certain way because they no longer need your perception to feel complete. And in that absence of management, in that open and uncalculated presence, Yates, something in your own nervous system registers a kind of person it is not used to encountering. And it responds with attention, deep involuntary attention. Adiates, because something ancient in human neurology knows to pay attention to the real thing when it appears among the performances. So how does someone reach this stage? Yates, because that is the question that matters most if you are watching this and something in what I am describing is resonating with you. The path to the final stage is not linear and it is not comfortable. Yates. It requires the empath to have gone far enough into their own pain to understand it rather than just survive it. There is a profound difference between surviving pain and understanding it. Radiates. Surviving it means you got through. Understanding it means you extracted the information it contained. It means you looked honestly at the patterns that led to the wound. Yates. At what you believed about yourself and about others that allowed the harm to occur, at what you gave away that you should have protected, at what you accepted that was never acceptable. Yates. And you did not do that to assign blame to yourself or to anyone else. You did it to see clearly, because clarity is the currency of the final stage. Yates. The empath who reaches this level has also done something that most people find extremely difficult. They have grieved properly, not performed grief, not rushed through grief to get to the healing. Radiates, but actually sat with loss long enough to process what was truly lost, what was learned, and what needed to be released. Behavioral research on post-traumatic growth, Yates, which is the documented phenomenon where some people emerge from significant trauma with measurably higher levels of psychological functioning than they had before. Radiates consistently shows that the key variable is not the nature of the trauma, but the quality of the processing. People who engage deeply with what happened to them, who allow themselves to fully feel the grief rather than bypassing it, and who ultimately construct a coherent narrative that integrates the experience rather than rejecting it. Radiates. These are the people who show the most significant growth. And growth in this context does not mean becoming harder. It means becoming more fully yourself, more clear about your values, more precise about what you will and will not accept. Radiates, more capable of genuine connection, because you are no longer bringing your unprocessed wounds into every interaction and asking the other person to accidentally or deliberately trigger them. Yates. And this brings us to the ending. The reason I want you to understand all of this is not academic. It is because I believe that many people watching this are closer to the final stage than they realize. It's not because reaching it is easy or automatic, but because the very things that have felt like damage might actually be the raw material for it. The sensitivity that made you absorb too much, the openness that made you trust the wrong people, the depth of feeling that made the betrayals so devastating. These are not disqualifying features. In the psychology of human development, radiates, the very traits that make a person most vulnerable in their early stages are often the same traits that, once properly integrated, make them most powerful in their later ones. It's the depth that made you easy to wound is the same depth that, once protected by wisdom, makes your perception extraordinary. The emotional range that made you easy to manipulate is the same range that radiates, once you stop performing it for the comfort of others, gives you access to a quality of experience most people never approach. The final stage is not a destination where everything becomes effortless. Yates. It is not a place where you no longer feel pain or loneliness or the ordinary difficulties of being human. What changes is your relationship to those things. Yates. Pain no longer means something is wrong with you. Solitude no longer means you have been abandoned. Being misunderstood no longer requires you to immediately correct the record. Radiates. You become capable of sitting with difficult things without being destroyed by them. And that capacity, that remarkable human capacity to remain whole inside difficulty, is not common. It is earned. Yates. And the price of admission is exactly what you have already been paying. So if you have been through experiences that tried to break you, if you have loved people who use that love carelessly, Idiots. If you have been open in rooms that were not safe for your openness, if you have carried more emotional weight than anyone around you seemed to notice or acknowledge. Radiates, I want you to consider the possibility that those experiences were not punishments. They were refinements, uncomfortable, sometimes devastating refinements, but refinements nonetheless. B8s, because the final stage empath is not someone who escaped hardship. They are someone who went through it so completely that it became wisdom. And wisdom, real wisdom, E8s, the kind that changes how you see people and how you inhabit the world, is never something that can be taken away. Once you have it, it is yours. Permanently, unconditionally, E8s. And the people who tried to make you doubt yourself, who tried to make you smaller, who tried to exploit the very depth that makes you extraordinary, they did not succeed. Because here you are, still feeling, still open, but different now, more real, more stable, more precisely and completely yourself than you have ever been. And if that is not the final stage, it is the beginning of it. And the beginning is exactly where the extraordinary starts.